Hello, everybody. Welcome into GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Monday, February 24th. Hope everybody's having a great day so far. We have a big show, lots of basketball news from over the weekend to get into. Joel Embiid, Greg Popovich, both guys have suffered some setbacks based on their current situations. We'll talk about what their future is in the NBA as coaches, as players, and more. We'll also talk about Matt Stafford, the big story out of the NFL right now. The Rams gave him permission to seek a trade. Is he going to get traded? Are the Rams going to move on? And where might Matt Stafford end up if they do decide to move on from him? Then we'll continue our series. We're going to go over what the NFL offseason might look like for the San Francisco 49ers, as well as what the MLB season might look like for the Seattle Mariners. As spring training is here, games are being played, baseball is back. But before we get into any of that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you're on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Monday, February 24th. But like I was saying, we are going to get into the first question. The big one that I have for today is around Joel Embiid. Joel Embiid, one of the best players in the world right now. One of the top 5 players in the NBA, unquestionably. One of the best big men currently playing the game. He also won an MVP not too recently, but with the news coming out yesterday and over the weekend that he might need surgery on his knee, that he's getting held out of a game yet again because he's injured yet again, the real question becomes, how much longer does he drag this out? Obviously, probably going to shut him down for the season. The Philadelphia 76ers, not a very good team this year. They were attempting to make a run in the playoffs last year. Joel Embiid get hurt down the stretch of the season, isn't able to play at 100% in the playoffs, right? Then they go out and they add to Tyrese Maxey, who was having a breakout year last season. They go out and they add Paul George. Paul George, injuries, falls off a cliff. Joel Embiid continues to be plagued by injuries from the beginning of the season, but this is something that has not just plagued him recently, but really his entire career. He's got a laundry list of injuries, and for a big man, the places that he's getting injured are very concerning for his longevity. Joel Embiid is just 30 years old. Joel Embiid has played a lot of basketball, but he's also missed a lot of basketball due to injury. Over his career, he's missed over 400 games due to injury. He's only played in 53% of the games he's supposed to play in. He's never played more than 70 games in a single season, never getting over 68, only getting over that 65 mark that the NBA put for awards twice. Once when he won his MVP, and once the season before when he got to 68. 68 and 66 games are the most. He barely ever gets over 60 games. 65 just twice. And that's the mark that the NBA has set for playing what a full season would be. Never gotten over 70. But let's look down his laundry list of injuries real quick, because Joel Embiid has been plagued with injuries during college, and this is just from his pro career. Before he was drafted, he was dealing with a stress fracture in his right foot. That forced him to miss his entire rookie season of 2014. Then he was getting ready to come back. In June of 2015, news breaks that he re-broke the same foot, the navicular bone stress fracture in his right foot, and he's out for yet another year. Now, foot injuries for big men are particularly scary, right? You talk about a guy like, for instance, a Zion Williamson, who's had to deal with injuries as a big guy, right? That has some to do with his weight, but as a 7-footer, Joel Embiid has to deal with a lot of those same issues. You're putting a lot of pressure on your feet when you're walking, when you're running, when you're jumping, when you're landing, especially in basketball, when you're being as explosive as Joel Embiid is. It's very dangerous for a big man to continue to play on injured legs, injured feet, injured knees. And that's why you see them get hurt so much, because they keep getting re-aggravated. They keep getting hurt again in different places. But that was just his foot. In January of 2017, that's when the knee issues began. And that's been the real one that's really plagued him his entire career. Just 30 games into his rookie season, his real rookie season in January of 2017, he falls and aggravates his knee. It's swelling in the knee. Later, he sits out a couple games, comes back, drops 32 points in one more game, and then they find that what they thought was a minor meniscus tear was actually quite a bit larger than they thought. So he's torn his meniscus for the first time in his career. Remember that, because he tears his meniscus, at least partially, a whole lot throughout the rest of his career. In January in 2017, he tears his meniscus for the first time, only playing 31 games in his real rookie season. That after missing his first 2 seasons after being drafted because of a broken bone in his right foot. In 2018, it doesn't have to do with his legs, but he did get a concussion when he collided with Markelle Fultz. Markelle Fultz, rookie at the time, he had a concussion and he fractured his left orbital bone. That's one eye bone hurt. In May 2021, a couple years later, he partially tears his meniscus again. This causes him to miss a couple of games, and then he gets it fixed in the offseason. In April of 2022, he tears a ligament in his thumb, requiring surgery in the offseason. He only missed a couple games because of this, but that's another part of the body that's been injured. In April of 2022, he takes an elbow to the face. That results in another concussion. That's 2 concussions and a right orbital bone fracture. Now, he's fractured both of his orbital bones in his face. That is not good, right? And then we get back to the meniscuses. In January of last year, almost a year ago, a torn lateral meniscus needs surgery. He comes back, plays a little bit in the playoffs, then he gets that surgery. Now, this is one that I believe is still bothering him today. In October of last year, October 2024, Joel Embiid goes out there, and he was held out of preseason. He came out and he said, I don't think I'm ever going to play back-to-backs again. That sounds like a guy that's really suffered a lot of big injuries in his career, and it's understandable, right? Joel Embiid is a guy that has dealt with a lot. We've gone through a laundry list of injuries so far. We've talked about multiple meniscus tears, fracturing both of his orbital bones, multiple concussions. These are just multiple broken bones in his foot, and that's only in his pro career. That's not including the injuries that he got in college, right? And he did deal with a bunch of injuries in college, despite going number 3 overall. In October of 2024, a knee injury holds him out all of the preseason and a little bit of the beginning of the year. And he plays a couple games. He's played 16 games this season. He's gone in and out of the lineup due to injuries. In January of this year, about a month ago, there's a foot sprain that causes him to miss a couple of games. That is switched later on the injury report to a left knee injury, and that's where we get to now. Now, over the weekend, it comes out that knee injury might require surgery, and he's consulting doctors. So, for those who are keeping track, his stats for injuries so far, that's 2 concussions, 2 broken bones in his feet, 3 meniscus injuries, 3 at least partially torn meniscuses, 2 orbital bone fractures, and a torn ligament in the thumb. This is a guy that is playing elite basketball right now, right? This is a guy that is undoubtedly one of the best in the NBA. But the more and more injuries he sustains, the harder it's going to be for the 76ers to justify paying him that massive contract they gave him, right? The harder it's going to be for when his new contract comes around for them to say you're still worth that money, because he just doesn't play anymore, and that's through no fault of his own. I'm not here to say that a player, is only as good as their injury history, right? Because he's an amazing player. But there does come a point where you need to look at what he's done in his career, what his career looks like in the future due to his continuing inavailability, his continuing inability to stay healthy on the court. And you have to think about, maybe it's time for him to hang it up. Joel Embiid would retire at the top of his game, and he's accomplished amazing things. He's won he's won an Olympic gold medal. He's won that MVP that he got a couple years back. Rookie of the Year in a season where he only played 31 games. But he's not going to be up for any more awards. And the way that the Sixers are going, especially this season, it makes sense to shut him down and get ready for the next year's coming. He'll play until the end of his contract, but the real question does come. Should Joel at least consider retirement? And I think there is a real thought there. And I think there's a real idea that he should retire, at least in my mind. I'm not saying retire now, but at the end of the contract, he's not going to get this massive money, I don't think. As good as he is, it's hard to pay a player that much when you don't know if he's going to be available for even a quarter of the season. And that's really tough to do for a 76ers team that's been so close, yet so far unable to get past that second round in the NBA playoffs. I think Joel Embiid might be one of those stories. Not quite as bad as some of the other ones in the past, but be one of those players that his career got cut short because of injury. And unfortunately, I think it's going to start to catch up to him right about now. So the question, I think he should really consider it. Should he retire right now? No. Let him keep playing at least the end of this contract. But I think there does need to start to be a discussion around Joel Embiid and how much longer he really does have in the NBA. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. How much longer do you think Joel Embiid has in the NBA? Do you think he'll get another massive contract? How risky is it to give a guy like this another massive contract? I'd love to hear your thoughts. But we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about Greg Popovich. One of the greatest coaches in the history of the NBA has suffered a setback. He had a stroke earlier this season in November. He is not going to return for the rest of the year. And much like Joel Embiid, we asked the question, should he retire? And what does his legacy look like right now if he were to never return to coaching again? We'll be right back here on GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back to GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Monday, February 24th. If you are just tuning in, we just finished going over whether or not Joel Embiid should retire. He's had a long, extensive list of injuries over his career so far. At just 30 years old, it might be time to think about hanging up that jersey. In this segment, we turn our attention to one of the greatest coaches of all time, Greg Popovich. Suffered a stroke earlier this year in November. We're going to talk a little bit about what happened to him, if he's ever going to coach again after it comes back that he's probably not going to return this season. But before we do, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you're on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Monday, February 24th. But like I was saying, we're going to get into a little bit around Greg Popovich. Greg Popovich, one of the greatest coaches in the history of the NBA. He has the league record for wins over his career, 1,390 wins. He's been the Spurs head coach for 29 years. He was the architect of that masterful Spurs dynasty of the 2000s and 2010s. It was announced earlier this weekend that Greg Popovich will not return for the rest of this season. At 76 years old, the coach suffered a minor stroke in November of 2024 and has been sidelined ever since. He's expected to make a full recovery, but with this news coming back, even though in December he said that he more than anybody else wants to be back on the sideline. The interim coach for the Spurs has been his assistant Mitch Johnson, who's done a fine job. The Spurs have won 22 out of their first 50 games this season. But now that Wemby has gone down, it doesn't feel like a big rush for anybody in that Spurs organization to get back. And it's a little bit weird when we're talking about a coach rather than a player coming back, but Greg Popovich, as legendary as he is, probably doesn't have that many years coaching left. The three-time coach of the year, one of just three coaches in the history of the NBA, five-time NBA champ, man with 170 postseason wins under his belt, is probably not in a rush to come back. But the real question comes, even though he says he wants to come back more than anybody else, is he actually going to? Right? This is a question because before it seemed like a certainty that he would, but now that they're pushing him back until the end of the season, whether that's his decision or the team's decision, it makes you think whether or not he'll retire. Again, at 76 years old, he is the oldest coach in the NBA by a pretty wide margin. He's dealt with his fair share of issues over the last couple seasons. This is obviously a Spurs team that has honestly unlimited potential as long as Victor Wembanyama is there in a Spurs uniform. So if you're a coach, a great one like Popovich is, you do want to stick around for a little bit. Even if you weren't a great coach, you want to stick around and ride the coattails of a Victor Wembanyama for a long time. But you also have to think about your health. And we were just talking a lot about the health issues of certain players. Joel Embiid, right? He's gone through his whole laundry list of issues, his whole laundry list of injuries down over the last couple seasons. Greg Popovich, not quite the same, but it is a more serious issue. Obviously, suffering a stroke, albeit a minor stroke, still is something that you need to keep an eye on. And, this high stress, high intensity level environment of being a head coach in a professional sports league in the NBA isn't really super conducive to, long-term health, right? And that's just part of it, right? He's going to be he's a Hall of Famer, a Hall of Fame coach, arguably the greatest coach of all time. I think the greatest coach of all time. But there come to a point where I think the world is just telling you it's time to hang it up. Greg Popovich, I'm sure, would die on the court if he had it his way. But at some point, you need to just, get together with family, with your children and everybody else and say, it's time, right? And he could stay on as in the front office, right? He doesn't need to retire from the NBA entirely. But I think when it comes to coaching, it's time for him to move on. Hand it over to Mitch Johnson, the guy who's been the interim head coach for a while. Just go back to being a GM instead of being both, or just be like a president of basketball operations. Either way, I think it's time to, at a minimum, dial back a little bit of your hands-on approach to this team, right? It's time to give a little bit of control to some other people. Not because he's still not doing a great job. I think he's done an amazing job. Even after the waning years of the dynasty have gone, he's done a great job building back this Spurs team, or at least laying the groundwork for this Spurs team to be brought back to the forefront, to be brought back to another potential dynasty, right? This time filled by Victor Wembanyama. But with Greg Popovich and his health, I think it's time for the Spurs to move on. Again, not off of him. Let him keep a role in that team forever. And he's probably the last guy that wants to move off of it, right? The Spurs, I'm sure, understand the situation. I'm sure he understands the situation, but he doesn't want to leave. That's why he's going to be there as long as he wanted. Now, I did think that Bill Belichick, a very similar situation, albeit without the health issues, Bill Belichick would never be fired from the Patriots. Never. I thought that would never happen. Greg Popovich, I think, is in a similar situation where he's actually unfireable. They obviously moved off of Bill Belichick a couple seasons ago. Now he finds a new job in college, but Greg Popovich is a guy that you actually cannot move off of, right? He'll be there until he wants to be done, and I don't think he'll ever want to be done. What the Spurs should do about this, it's up in the air. Let him come back to coaching. He's a great coach, but I don't think for his health it's worth it to come back. Bring him back as a president of basketball operations, assistant GM or something like that, but I think it's time to move on a little bit from Greg Popovich just for his own sake. But let me know what your thoughts are. I'd love to hear it. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we turn our attention over to the NFL. One of the biggest stories of this weekend for one of the best quarterbacks in all of the sport, Matthew Stafford, potentially on the trade block. We'll talk about what might happen with him, where he might go, what teams might be interested in him, and why he's even on the trade block to begin with. We'll be right back here on GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now. Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back to GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Monday, February 24th. If you are just tuning in, we just finished going over what the future might look like for the Spurs and Greg Popovich. In this segment, we turn our attention to the NFL. Matthew Stafford, one of the best quarterbacks in all of the NFL at age 37, potentially on the trade market. We'll talk about how big a deal it is, where he might end up, and much more. But before we do, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you're on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Monday, February 24th. But like I was saying, we are going to get into a little bit of Matthew Stafford talk. Matthew Stafford is one of the top 10 quarterbacks in the NFL. No doubt about it, right? Matthew Stafford, in my opinion, is sitting anywhere in that 5 to 8 range. Now, 5 might be a little bit generous, but when you're talking about where these NFL quarterbacks rank season by season, you look at, especially in the playoffs, the guys that step up. Matthew Stafford undoubtedly is that guy. Matthew Stafford went number 1 overall to the Detroit Lions back in 2009 out of Georgia, got traded over to the Rams, and immediately when he was finally surrounded by the Super Bowl caliber talent, took his team and won a Super Bowl, right? Now Matthew Stafford, at age 37, is looking at getting one more cash grab, right? He's undoubtedly a great quarterback, but we've now seen over the last couple of seasons, outside of Matthew Stafford and Tom Brady, when one of these guys, one of these big name quarterbacks switches teams, it hasn't necessarily been super successful, especially at their veteran age. You think of a Russell Wilson leaving Seattle, heading to Denver. That was supposed to be a big move. You think of an Aaron Rodgers leaving Green Bay, going to the Jets. That one not necessarily worked out, but I think this one is a little bit different. Matthew Stafford showed that he still had game left in him, right? Matthew Stafford, a guy that's only going to be paid $23 million this season, has been taking it year after year. He's been a guy that says, I don't want to make a long-term commitment. The Rams feel the same way. They don't want to make a long-term commitment. Now, the Rams seemingly are trying to move off of that old core. They're making trade. They've let Cooper Kupp know that they're trading him away. He's on the trade block officially. Now they've given Matthew Stafford and his agents permission to ask around what basically it would take for how much he would get if he were to go to other teams. Now, there's a couple teams that automatically stick out in that bunch, and they're the teams that are, quote-unquote, a quarterback away, right? We're talking about the Steelers. The Steelers, a team that have been rumored to be a quarterback away for a very long time, since the end of Big Ben's prime, right? Or the Jets, who thought they were a quarterback away and seemingly were a quarterback away when they went out and got Aaron Rodgers. Maybe they make that, maybe they try one more time and go with Matthew Stafford. Both of these are great options, right? Obviously, I think the Rams should keep him. I think it'd be stupid of them to trade away Matthew Stafford. Matthew Stafford, like I said before, is a top 5 to 8 quarterback in the NFL. Outside of the elite 4 of quarterbacks, right? You've got your Joe Burrow, your Patrick Mahomes, your Josh Allen, and your Lamar Jackson. Those are your top 4 guys, and no one is really putting a candle to them. Outside of that, your next group of 4, your top 5 to 8, you've got Matthew Stafford, you've got Jalen Hurts, you've got, in my opinion, Justin Herbert. I understand he's had his issues in big moments, but Justin Herbert, I think, pretty clearly a top quarterback in this league, and Jaden Daniels. Those are my next 4 quarterbacks in just about any order, right? You can put those guys in there, but either way, Matthew Stafford, especially what he showed against the Eagles defense that completely shut down a Chiefs team, completely shut down a Commanders team, completely shut down a Packers team. The only team that gave up that gave them any kind of fight at all was the Rams in the snow, which makes it even more impressive. They were doing it with inclement weather, not helping them at all, right? That was massive, and it showed that Matthew Stafford still is one of the top quarterbacks in the game, and it's not just that, right? He has been a gunslinger forever. Matthew Stafford is going to be a great quarterback for at least one more season. So if you're looking at a team like the Giants or the Raiders, who have been rumored to be interested in Matthew Stafford, the Giants in particular have had their name all over Matthew Stafford for the last month or so. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't fit that timeline. But if you are a team like the Jets, for instance, I think would be the perfect fit for him outside of the Rams. Again, I don't understand why the Rams would want to move off of him other than the fact that they're just not willing to pay him money, which I don't understand. This is a team that is arguably in a Super Bowl contending window right now. They still have a great defense, a great defensive line in particular. You still have a great quarterback. You have 2 great wide receivers if you just stand pat. You've got a great running back. You have an offensive line that is solid when healthy. This is a team that is in a Super Bowl contending window. They're arguably the second best NFC team this season. That, when healthy, of course. The Lions are in there. But still, the Rams, they're a team that took the Lions to overtime in the first game of the season when the Lions were completely healthy and the Rams were not completely healthy, right? So you can make the argument that look, this is a Rams team that is in a Super Bowl contending window, and they're just throwing it out because it doesn't fit their timeline, right? It's dumb. I think Matthew Stafford should stay on this team. They don't really have a succession plan behind him either, right? Behind Matthew Stafford, the Rams' top quarterback on the roster is Jimmy Garoppolo. And we've seen Jimmy Garoppolo shine in good situations, right? He's taken the 49ers to the Super Bowl. He's been successful when he was with the Patriots in the Tom Brady, Bill Belichick era over there, when they were winning Super Bowls and they were a dynasty, right? But he's not a guy that you want to rely on. There are plenty of things to think about with this team. Maybe if they move off of Matthew Stafford, they want to go get Aaron Rodgers. That doesn't make a lot of sense. I think Matthew Stafford is better than Aaron Rodgers. I've heard rumors potentially they go out and get a guy like Sam Darnold. I don't know. Matthew Stafford, again, is better than Sam Darnold. Sam Darnold is not a ceiling raiser. Matthew Stafford is. Matthew Stafford, and that's the difference between these really top 10 quarterbacks and these not top 10 quarterbacks, right? These are the ones that are your ceiling raisers. These are the ones that are going to take a good team and make them great. These are the ones that are going to take a great team and make them contenders, right? These are the ones that are elite, right? The Sam Darnolds of the world, they're not going to raise your floor. The Jared Goffs of the world, they're not going to raise your floor. They're going to keep you exactly where they are. They're going to have they're going to take what you give them, and they're going to do their job exactly how well you give them that job, right? We talk about a situation in Minnesota that is just about as perfect as any situation can be for any quarterback, right? You have the best wide receiver in the NFL, a good running back, a great defense, a solid offensive line. That's all you could ever want and ever need, right? In the 49ers system, right? And I'm not saying Brock Purdy is and Brock Purdy, I think, is someone that's probably going to get paid a good amount of money. He's not at the same level as Matthew Stafford, right? You give him a great offensive line, some great weapons, a great defense, he can take you to a Super Bowl. Jimmy G did the same thing over there, right? He would be in that tier when he was in his prime, right? These are not floor raisers. These are just guys that are going to do what you have. They're going to do great with what you give them. Matthew Stafford is going to raise your team to that next level. So if you are looking for a trade for Matthew Stafford and you're a team like the Jets that really doesn't have a future, I'm giving up a top 10 pick. If you're a team like the Giants, it doesn't make sense, right? And I know I'm saying that as a Giants fan. I would love Matthew Stafford to join this team just because it would be fun. But Matthew Stafford joining the Giants would take them from a 3-win team to, at best, a 9-win wild card first-round exit team, right? This team is not good enough to add Matthew Stafford and then feel happy with it. Now, this is the kind of move that Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll would make because they want to save their jobs, and that's understandable from their end. I do understand where they're coming from and why they would want to do it like that. But for the future of the team, trading away that number 3 overall pick, even if you were going to take a quarterback that I don't think is as good as Matthew Stafford, it just doesn't work as well. So the teams that I think should go all in for Matthew Stafford, give up that top 10 pick, give up that first round pick. The Steelers, they don't really have that asset to do it, but they should kill for Matthew Stafford. They should give their soul, they should give their body, they should give their mind for Matthew Stafford. That would immediately take them to probably a 10 to 12 win team, I think. The Jets, we've tried it before, but Matthew Stafford probably worth that number 7 overall pick in my mind. You're not going to get someone better than that, especially at the quarterback situation that they have. There's not going to be a better option. Go get Matthew Stafford. Continue to build your team. You have a team that's basically ready to go. An elite defense now that you have a really good defensive coach back, because that defense was really good when they had their coach there, right? Before they fired Robert Saleh, they had a really good defense. Then everything fell apart. And Aaron Rodgers and Matthew Stafford isn't going to be as bad for the locker room as Aaron Rodgers was. So the Jets, I think, should give that 7 overall pick, maybe even give a future second, future first, maybe, if that's the asking price, but just give everything he needs to Matthew Stafford to get this deal done, because that is by far your best option on this market. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think? Where do you think Matthew Stafford ends up. I personally think he's going to end up staying with the Rams. I don't think he gets traded, but in the off chance he does, I think the Jets and the Steelers should be the teams that go all the way in for him. I'd love to hear your thoughts. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we turn our attention over to the San Francisco 49ers. We talked a little bit about them, what their offseason might look like as we get ready for what will be actually a very, very important offseason for them as they figure out what to do with Brock Purdy. We'll be right back here on GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found. For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Monday, February 24th, if you are just tuning in. We just finished going over the situation with the Rams and Matthew Stafford potentially on the trade block. In this segment, we turn our attention over to an off-season preview. What would a dream off-season look like for the San Francisco 49ers? But before we do that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you're on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you have a burning question about sports, anything that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Monday, February 24th. But like I was saying, we're going to get a little bit into what a dream offseason might look like for the San Francisco 49ers. The San Francisco 49ers are in a very interesting spot right now as we speak, right? This was a team that went 6-11 last year, finished last place in their division, of course, missing the playoffs. But this is also a team that made the Super Bowl, went to overtime against a Chiefs dynasty, and just lost in overtime to that team just 2 years ago. Now, the story of their season last year was, of course, injuries. It was a messy and loud offseason. One of the worst off seasons I've seen in a very long time, just because the drama that went all around this team just would not stop. It started and ended really with Brandon Ayuk, whose negotiations took the entire off season. He asked for a trade, then said he didn't want a trade, agreed to a contract, agreed to a trade, didn't agree to a trade, and then eventually decided to sign a massive contract. Now, all of that was null and void because Brandon Ayuk got hurt and missed most of this season. And he wasn't the only one. Trent Williams, probably the most important football player on this team. Christian McCaffrey, a close second. Dre Greenlaw missed some time. Javon Hargrave missed a bunch of time. Every single one of their running backs that looked like they were ever going to do something got hurt yet again, as Kyle Shanahan running backs tend to do. Jordan Mason had a strong start to the season before getting hurt. Elijah Mitchell came in for a little bit, then got hurt. You had even the rookie, Ricky Pearsall, get hurt in the beginning of the season, come in a little bit later. This is a team that desperately needed a break from the injury bug. It wasn't that it was a million injuries. It was just a bunch of deep cuts and deep wounds. And even with that, this is a team that still looked solid at times, right? The offensive line could have been better, but that's, again, without your stalwart tackle, Trent Williams, it's tough to do. The offense could have been better in the red zone. That would have been really important, but you didn't have your big red zone weapon in Christian McCaffrey, and that hurts this offense a lot. And that's where the big issue was in the red zone, right? They could not convert in the red zone. They were able to move the ball up and down the field, but at the end of the day, when you can't punch it in for 6, it's going to hurt your overall record. Right now, they head into this offseason projected around $50 million. That's good for 12th in the NFL. But the big question for them is, what are they going to do with Brock Purdy? And we've talked a lot about Brock Purdy this offseason, the Brock Purdy conundrum. He's a guy that's very polarizing, especially when it comes to giving him a contract. Because we talked about in the last segment, Brock Purdy isn't a guy that's really going to raise your ceiling, but he's also, I think, in my opinion, in a tier above your Jared Goffs, your Sam Darnolds of the world. He's in a tier above your Jimmy Garoppolos of the world that are just going to have what you have, or going to do with what you hand them. He's going to do a little bit more than that, but he's not to the same level where he's going to be this guy that's going to raise you to the next tier of contention. This is a really interesting negotiation. With the salary cap increasing as much as it is, and we talked a little bit about it, I think, last week when we talked about the salary cap, the most I feel comfortable paying any player is 20%, really. 25% is fine, but 20% is generally what I would be happy with, right? In that situation, you are looking at $55 million for 20% and $69 million for 25%, right? So you're looking at a potentiality of Brock Purdy getting $70 million. I think his contract comes out to this offseason probably closer to $65 million a year, making him the highest paid quarterback by $5 million over Dak Prescott. Now that's that's probably the max his contract gets to. In reality, it probably sits closer to 61, 62, overtaking Dak Prescott, but not really setting a massive new bar. But that is a lot of money to give out. And they have a lot of pending free agents, 24 pending UFAs, including a bunch of the running backs. Jordan Mason, who's a restricted free agent, Elijah Mitchell. They're probably going to let both of them go, if I'm being honest. But a couple big pieces from the defense. Dre Greenlaw, Javon Hargrave, Talona Hufanga, Charvarius Ward, Rock Ya-Sin, Nick McLeod. These guys that have been pretty good for your depth, as well as a couple starters. You're not going to be able to sign all of them. So they need to figure out what's important, because this is a team that defense actually struggled a little bit. They weren't able to get the pressure on the quarterback. Nick Bosa has been struggling a little bit this season and over the last couple seasons, and that has not helped them at all. So what I'm looking at in free agency for them, you need to sign your cornerback, because they don't have a lot of great corners on the market. Charvarius Ward, one of the best corners on the market right now, and there's not a lot of great corners in the draft either. At least ones that I think are worth taking with the number 11 overall pick. Charvarius Ward, I think, is a must re-sign. Dre Greenlaw is kind of the heart and soul of this team. We saw a whole issue come up when he was finally healthy. Devondre Campbell walked off, basically quit on the team because, Dre Greenlaw was finally ready to go. Dre Greenlaw, of course, got hurt coming off the sideline in the Super Bowl last season. He's a guy that I think is really important to re-sign, but he's going to command a good amount of money despite coming off of an injury. Hufanga would be good for them to re-sign, but I think they can survive without him. Outside of that, Javon Hargrave, a pretty solid defensive lineman, someone that can be pretty good in the run game and in the pass rush. They probably are going to let him walk. Injured last season, they just don't quite have the money to bring all of these guys back. So in free agency, what I'm looking at is, if you can't sign Charvarius Ward, bring in Carlton Davis. You have to bring in one of those two. Bring in some offensive line help to go opposite or either be the backup for a guy like Trent Williams. Trent Williams, who, as you saw, when he's not in the lineup, this team completely different. And look at the safety market. There's a couple safeties out there that I think would be really good for them to get. Justin Reed, Justin Simmons, a couple of these guys that are hitting free agency, be pretty good for them to go get, right? In the NFL draft, like I said, they have that number 11 overall pick. And with that number 11 overall pick, you just kind of have to take best available. This is a team I think should focus on defense more than anything. With Debo requesting a trade, maybe you can get away with a wide receiver, but I don't think they need a wide receiver in the first round really that badly. The cornerbacks that are probably going to be available for them there, top two cornerbacks on the board, Jahdae Barron and Will Johnson. Will Johnson out of Michigan, Barron out of Texas. I like both of them. If they needed a corner that bad, if they weren't able to get both Ward and Davis, grab one of them there. If not, go grab one of the many edge rushers that this class is going to have. There's a lot of great pass rushers here. James Pierce Jr. out of Tennessee, Mike Green out of Marshall, Mykel Williams out of Georgia are guys that I think will be available around this slot 11. But at the end all be all, if they really think that none of those guys are available, if none of the guys that they have on the board are very important, go grab an offensive tackle. Grab Kelvin Banks Jr. Shore up that offensive line is never, ever a bad idea. But I think what they should be focusing on is Barron, Johnson, Pierce, or Williams. I love Mykel Williams at pick 11 to the San Francisco 49ers. Give Nick Bosa some help off the edge so he's not getting double teamed all the time. He struggled a little bit in the last couple seasons with that. I think that's something that would be huge for this San Francisco 49ers team. The other thing that's going to be huge for them to be successful is, of course, injury luck. And that's nothing that you can really do. This seems to happen a lot to the San Francisco 49ers, where their injuries just stack up over and over and over and over again. Hopefully they can get over that, because this is a really talented team. But again, the big question for this team is going to be around their quarterback. Brock Purdy, the Mr. Irrelevant of his draft, is up for a contract either this offseason or next season. He will be a free agent next season. And like we learned, and like I've been saying for a long time on this show, if you want to get ahead, if you want to have a contract look like a discount, you sign them as soon as possible. Because 5 years from now, when Brock Purdy's contract runs out, $60 million is going to look like nothing. $60 million is going to look like a top 8 contract in the NFL, not a top 1 contract in the NFL. And that is what you want. That is what you want as an NFL team, to have your quarterback on discount, like the 49ers have been able to have with Brock Purdy being paid the minimum, that 7th round draft pick salary, right? The lowest paid starting quarterback in the NFL. So if they're able to work something out with him, they have the freedom to do a lot more. Overall, get Brock Purdy signed, sign Charvarius Ward, and then just get best available, because this is a team that is still a Super Bowl caliber squad, and they might show that next season. Don't sleep on the 49ers. Don't forget about them. They're still really good. They're still a sleeping giant. But let me know what you think a perfect offseason might look like for the San Francisco 49ers. What would you do with Brock Purdy? I'd love to hear your thoughts. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we talk a little bit about the MLB season. Spring training is here. There is baseball going on right now. We're going to continue going over every single MLB team season preview. Today, we continue our journey around the AL West, stopping up in Seattle with the Mariners. We'll be right back here on GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. Welcome back to GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Monday, February 24th. If you were just tuning in, we just finished going over what a perfect offseason might look like for the San Francisco 49ers. In this segment, we take a look at what the MLB season might have in store for the Seattle Mariners, a team that struggled especially offensively last season. We'll talk about what they did in the offseason to get better and if they'll improve or not. But before we do, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you're on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Monday, February 24th. But like I was saying, we're going to get into a little bit of the Mariners offseason. The Mariners had an interesting year last season because they were expected to make it back to the playoffs after making it a couple seasons ago. They finished 85-77, good for second in the AL West and missing the playoffs. This was also a team that had and arguably still has the best pitching staff in the league. Now, the issue with this Mariners team last year is they could not hit the ball. Julio Rodriguez, their young superstar, who they gave a massive contract to, took a downturn last season. He was in MVP conversations at the beginning of the year last year. Just about this time, we were having conversations about Julio Rodriguez potentially winning an MVP. And he's a guy that still can do that, but his bat did not exist to the level that it needed to last season. Now, the Mariners did not do anything this offseason. They signed Rowdy Tellez to a minor league deal. They brought in Donovan Solano on a 1-year, $3.5 million deal and re-signed Jorge Polanco on a 1-year, $7 million deal. They also didn't lose too much either. They lose a couple of back-end bullpen arms, a couple of guys that were some depth for them on the bench. Austin Voth, Sam Haggerty, Josh Rojas, Justin Turner, Yimi Garcia, Luis Urias, right? These are guys that weren't exactly number one contributors to them last season, but they are pretty solid depth pieces for a team that needed them. Now we're talking about pitching, and that is the strength of this team. You talk about a team that 1 to 5 in their projected starting pitching rotation is crazy, and even when you get to the injuries, 1 to 6 would be crazy. You have Logan Gilbert, Luis Castillo, George Kirby, Bryce Miller, Brian Wu, and Matt Brash when he comes back off of injury. That is the best pitching. That's the best starting pitching rotation in all of Major League Baseball by a million years. Bryce Wu, their number 5, should be a number 2 on just about any other team. But of course, like we said, that was not the issue with this team last year. The pitching was always amazing. The issue is they couldn't get any run support. They couldn't get any runs to support the amazing pitching staff. There's a couple things that they need to figure out this season, especially at the second base position. The second base position is up for grabs. The Mariners, for a while, really have had trouble filling that hole at second base. Dylan Moore, the incumbent, the guy who played second base 135 games for them last season, is the front runner to take it. And when you take a look at Fangraphs, they're projecting him to be the lead second baseman. But there's a couple guys that could go and take his spot, especially Cole Young, the 49th ranked prospect by MLB Pipeline. Second base prospect, if he has a good spring, could come up and take that spot from Dylan Moore. Dylan Moore, not necessarily the greatest player in Seattle for the Seattle Mariners. He's a guy that by Fangraphs is projected to hit at the bottom of the order, hit 9th, but there's a couple other guys that could take it as well. Ryan Bliss, Leo Rivas. Rivas is more of a utility guy who can play shortstop and third base. He might just stay on the roster as some extra depth in the infield. Ryan Bliss is an interesting one. He's not necessarily the favorite. He doesn't have the best defense, and he strikes out a lot. But if he has a good spring, again, he could take over that second base spot. But right now, I think what this really comes down to is between Dylan Moore and Cole Young. Again, Cole Young, the 49th ranked prospect by MLB Pipeline, if he can come up and he can show that he's ready to play at the major league level, I think the Mariners might come in and give him that shot at second base. Dylan Moore probably stays roster as a backup, but still, Cole Young is someone to watch in the spring. There's a couple questions around the DH position as well. Mitch Haniger, the fourth outfield for them, was taking over that role last season, but Mitch Garver, their backup catcher, had played really good at the plate. So maybe he gets a couple of at-bats at the DH spot, but you can rotate them. That one's not that big of a deal. When we take a look at this lineup, this is where the Mariners need to really improve. And they didn't do too much to change it, but that's not the worst thing in the world. They have Victor Robles leading off projected. Victor Robles, of course, who came over from the Washington Nationals, was supposed to be this elite prospect, never really developed down in Washington. But once he came over to Seattle, maybe it was the change of scenery, he started raking. He started hitting the ball, playing great defense. You have him in right field. He is a guy that if he can continue his pace from last season is going to be a great add to this team. Julio Rodriguez, we talked about him a little bit in center. He's someone that has the ability to play at MVP level. Cal Raleigh, he is their catcher. He's someone that's arguably the best catcher in all of baseball. There's a lot of really good catchers in baseball right now. Cal Raleigh hitting third, pretty good. Then you have Randy Arozarena. And Arozarena was a trade deadline acquisition. He only played half the season. They're counting on a full season of him to really turn around that batting order. He's someone that has a bat that can be extremely productive. Maybe that's the big piece that's going to turn this team around. At first base, they have Luke Raley or Donovan Solano. Not the most exciting thing. DH, we talked about either Mitch Haniger or Mitch Garver. And then at shortstop, J.P. Crawford. Solid defender, a contact hitter, a little bit of speed there at the bottom of the lineup. I like third base, Jorge Polanco. And second base, again, not sure. Dylan Moore, potentially Cole Young, potentially Leo Rivas. There's a big fight over there at second base. But this is a lineup that if they're able to get production that they were expecting at the beginning of last season out of Julio Rodriguez, the production that they got out of Victor Robles this season, if they're able to get a full year of good Randy Arozarena, this is a top 4, a top 5, a pretty good lineup in all of baseball, right? This is a team that won 80-plus games last season despite having a really bad offense, and that is a lot to do because of that pitching rotation. But it's not just the rotation that we went over of Gilbert, Castillo, Kirby, Miller, and Wu, but also the bullpen. Andres Munoz, one of the best closers in all of baseball. Some pretty great setup guys in the back end as well, in Cole Snyder and Gregory Santos. This is a really good Mariners squad. Their over-under set at 84.5 wins this season. I think they get a resurgent year. I think they find a way to sneak in as a wild card team, still finish second in the AL West. But I do think that this is a year where we get a little bit better out of Julio Rodriguez, a Julio Rodriguez that could return to potentially MVP form. This is a team that I think wins 87 to 90 games and finds their way back into the playoffs, second place in the division to the Texas Rangers. But let me know what your thoughts are. I'd love to hear them. What do you think this Seattle Mariners team looks like this season? I'd love to hear. But thank you, everybody, so much for tuning in to today's episode of GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I have been your host, Jeremy Lapidus. We'll be back tomorrow, continuing our series of MLB and NFL offseason stuff. The NFL Combine is this week. We'll do a little bit of preview for that, as well as anything else that happens from around the world of sports tonight. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.